those personalities and what made those three people either get along well or not get along very well on Sunday. So if you have a chance to pick one of those up, take a list, look at it, read it, and then start trying to formulate why did Jonathan and David get along so well based on personality? Why was Saul opposite of them? And why didn't Saul get along with either David or Jonathan? And I think the personalities aren't the entirety of the answer, but they're part of the answer. They're part of the puzzle that goes into why those guys didn't get along. The other thing that I have up here is, I mentioned that I had some stickers. We use this in a Bible storytelling workshop. And so if you want stickers to sort of mark the inciting incident, the rising action, the falling action, the climax, and all that, you're welcome to those stickers. If we run out, I can always print some more. I think I bought 5,000 of those stickers. So they'll be not 5,000 sheets, but it'll make 5,000 stickers. So I think we have plenty of opportunity to make as many stickers as we want if you think that will be helpful. So last time we finished up the story of David and Goliath and how David defeated Goliath in that final battle, and the Israelites had incredible victory over the Philistines. But I want to bring up a couple things. Before I bring up a couple points, sort of wrap that lesson up, do you guys have anything that you would like for us to consider about the story of David and Goliath that we didn't consider? Whether lessons we learned from that, what we learned about David, what we learned about God, that we didn't get to? I don't think we answered those last two questions very effectively. So if you have a comment, go ahead and raise your hand. Well, if you don't have something, I want you to turn to look at 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. There's something that I find very interesting in this section that for years I overlooked this. I didn't even realize that it was important or even that it was interesting. I probably didn't even read this part of it. So in verse 54, it says, David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. And he put Goliath's weapon in his tent. So I overlooked that. David takes the head of Goliath and he takes it to Jerusalem. Now, he probably doesn't take it to Jerusalem right then and there. A lot of times the authors of the books will write some things as if they already happened because they're writing it later. So later on, David took Goliath's head to Jerusalem. One of the reasons why I don't think he took it there right then, because he's in the middle of battle. It doesn't make any sense to go to Jerusalem to take the head of the Philistine there when they're chasing the Philistine and they're having this war. And at this particular time, who is in charge of Jerusalem? The Jebusites. They haven't even conquered Jerusalem yet. So for David to take the head right then and there to Jerusalem, he wouldn't have access to get in the city. It would be a silly thing. What is more likely to have happened is David kept Goliath's head. That was not uncommon. You know, if you go out and you kill a deer, sometimes you might save the skull. Not necessarily the antlers, but Drew did this one time. The first deer that he killed, he saved the head. You do all this stuff to the head to make it where the skull is just there, and you can put it in your room and look at a skull all the time. Now, consider this. Let's say I am a soldier in those days, and I am, instead of having notches on my belt, I have a chariot full of skulls hanging by as I drove by. What would you think if I came to town and I had 100 skulls hanging from my chariot? How many of you would be scared of me? Probably you would, right? Because this guy has killed 100 guys. Look at all those guys he's killed. He's not messing around. Now, what if you're the guy that has Goliath's skull? And you take it around with you, and maybe when you're getting ready to battle, you know how we talked about last week, they have these battle cries? It's not uncommon for them to line up in their battle array and then to start yelling at each other. What if instead of Goliath coming out and giving his chance, let's say the next time you're in this, David has Goliath's skull on a pole and he sort of lifts it up in the air. How scared do you think the other side would be? So some scholars, and there's even some fairly early on, maybe 300 years, 200 years after Christ, that there's a tradition that David actually took Goliath's skull to Jerusalem and displayed it there after he conquered Jerusalem. And Golgotha is just the shortened version of Goliath from Gath. That was the well-known place where David had put up Goliath's skull in Jerusalem, and it became known as the place of the skull. And so, instead of Golgotha that we've always looked at, it's just a possibility, being because this mountaintop, this cliff looks like a skull, maybe it was just common knowledge at that time that David had brought Goliath's head there. And so that little tidbit in that one verse that I'd overlooked for years could have a really interesting possibility of what that really means to the story. One thing as we read these stories, if you want to get the most out of these, you have to have a mind that's curious. And when you see something like this, don't just read by it. Oh, I don't know what that means. No big deal. You have so many resources at your disposal. You don't have to write a question and put it in the box in the back for Brian to answer someday. Or you don't have to come ask me. There's just so much research that you can do on your own. And if you can't find something, you're welcome to ask us. But find these details. And if you find a detail in the story, research it a little bit, bring it to us. And say, hey, I noticed this from this particular story. And I wanted to share some of the things that I found on this particular story that I had not found before. I just thought that was very interesting. Thought you might like to maybe examine that a little bit further on your own time. So what has happened is Goliath now is dead. David has Goliath's head, and Saul wants to know who David is, whose family he comes from. So he calls for David. David goes and puts all of Goliath's stuff into his own tent, because the way that it was is if you killed a particular soldier, his stuff belonged to you. And so nobody else would have touched Goliath's stuff. They knew that David killed Goliath, and so they wouldn't have gone into Goliath's tent and taken anything. Whatever is in there, whatever belonged to Goliath, now belongs to David. So he takes all of Goliath's armor and all the stuff that he had, he puts it in his tent, but he takes Goliath's head, and he goes and talks to Saul. Saul wants to know who his dad is. He wants to know who I need to exempt from taxes, all this good stuff, and he's totally amazed. I don't know how he carried the head. The most logical thing to me, either you put it in the bag or you hold it by the hair. I can't think of any other way you would carry a dead person's head that's been decapitated. So after he gets done talking to Saul, Jonathan was there. Abner was there. Saul was there. Jonathan was there. Saul and Abner must have either left, or as David was leaving, Jonathan followed him out. Now, I want you just to imagine for a second, what is Jonathan seeing when he looks at David? He's seeing a 15 to 16-year-old kid who just came to bring some meat and some cheese to his family just hours ago, dressed in shepherd's clothing, maybe still holding Goliath's head with his sling, and it says that Jonathan does something here. That's one of the most amazing moments in all of these stories, is Jonathan makes a covenant with David. How old do you think Jonathan is here? Sometimes we picture David and Jonathan being close to the same age. Jonathan is probably 35 or so. So Jonathan is 20 years older, approximately, than David. He's in his mid-30s. He's a warrior. He has already had, about 10 to 15 years ago, maybe before David was even born, he had his moment in the sun where he goes out and says to his armor bearer, let's go attack the Philistines, because the Lord can save with many, or the Lord can save with just a few. The numbers don't matter with the Lord. And so he and his armor bearer go, and they kill a whole bunch of people right in their small area of town, and then they have this huge success on that particular moment. He's a seasoned warrior, and he wants to make a covenant with David. Not only is he a seasoned warrior, he's the prince. He is the heir to the throne. Jonathan saw something that day that nobody else saw in David. And I don't know how he figured it out, but he is starting to. If he doesn't know it right at this moment, he is starting to figure out that David is going to be the next king. Because what he does after he makes his covenant with David, he gives David some tokens of that covenant. He gives him his robe. Could you imagine this 15-year-old shepherd boy? He's putting on the robe of a prince, the one that is going to be the next king. And then Jonathan gives him all of his armor, including his sword and his bow, as a token of this covenant. Because Jonathan sees something in David that Jonathan used to have himself. I don't know about you, but sometimes I look back on my life and I feel like I had more courage at other points of my life. Maybe I wasn't smart enough not to have courage. Maybe I had more faith. I trusted in God more. I took more chances. I took more risks. I wasn't scared as much. And I think Jonathan is seeing that in David. David is what I was like 15 years ago. But for the last 40 days, I've been just as scared as my father and everybody else that has no faith. And here is this guy. He has come and he has conquered the king. So it says that their souls were knit together and that Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. So what we're going to do is we're sort of isolating out this relationship between Jonathan and David. We'll come back and fill in some of the gaps on Sunday with what's taking place with Saul through all this. But right now, Saul is pretty frustrated with David. He likes David off and on. The evil spirit comes upon him, and then he starts saying some things that he shouldn't say, and he starts doing some things that he shouldn't say. And in the meantime, he actually, in chapter 18, throws a spear at David twice, trying to kill him. And then chapter 19 begins. When chapter 19 begins, Saul has already decided, I want David dead. And so he tells all of his men and Jonathan, I want David dead. Well, the problem is, Jonathan delights in David. He doesn't want David dead. And so he goes out and tells David, hey, look, we got a serious problem here. My dad is trying to kill you. He has just told all of his servants to kill you, myself included. He's aiming for you. You got to go hide. And hide right now because you got a whole bunch of people trying to kill you. There's a bounty on your head. Saul's given a command. They're going to try to fulfill this command and kill you. And so what I'll do is I'll go bring my father out into a field. We'll have a discussion. And I will sound my father out. And then I will let you know everything he says. And so that's what David does. That's what Jonathan does. He brings Saul out into the field. They have this discussion. And Jonathan argues on David's account. He goes, look, why are you so mad at David? David hasn't done anything for you. As a matter of fact, David is the one that risked his life and killed the Philistine. And I remember looking at you, Dad. When that happened, you were pretty relieved about that. You were happy about that. He has not done anything wrong to you. So don't kill an innocent man. And so Saul takes an oath and he says, by the God of Israel, I will not kill him. He will not be killed. And so Jonathan goes back, gets David, and says, look, come back to the palace, and you can continue to do what you want to do. Well, the rest of chapter 19, Saul goes at it again. He's trying to kill David. He's trying to use the Philistines to kill David by sending David out to battle. And then he's trying to use his daughter, giving his daughter to David in marriage and saying, here, I tell you what, you can be son-in-law, even though you don't have any money, and you got to go kill 100 Philistines and bring their foreskins back to me. David goes and kills 200 Philistines, brings the foreskins back, and he's just bent and determined that he is going to have David killed. Well, the issue now is Saul knows there's a mole, and the mole is his own son. And so he's leaving Jonathan out of the loop. He's not telling Jonathan. Well, you have a whole bunch of things happen here with David and his wife and escaping for his life and Saul wanting to kill him. And then David goes and tracks down Jonathan and says, your dad's trying to kill me again. And Jonathan says, no, there's no way my dad's trying to kill you. If my dad were trying to kill you, he would tell me first. And David says, no, he knows you like me. And you're the last person he's going to tell. He's keeping this from you. And so they devised this plan. And in this particular moment, they made a covenant back there in chapter 18. In chapter 19, they reaffirmed this covenant twice. And they expand the covenant to not just be between David and Jonathan, but to be between David's descendants and Jonathan's descendants. And Jonathan makes sure, now you understand, David, we have a covenant here. You can't kill me when you take over. Because that was the thing that would happen, right? If one king came up and rose up and destroyed another king and took over, it was automatic. You go kill all the family. Because you don't want any of them claiming to be the king, or if he has any rightful way to be king, you just got to get rid of him. That's just the way they did it back then. And so Jonathan says, you can't kill me, you can't kill my family. He agrees to do this. And then they have this, I'm going to go, it's the New Moon Festival. They had a lunar calendar. And at the beginning of each new moon, they would have a feast. Every month they would have a feast. And the way that the cycle worked a little bit is you would see a sliver of the moon. You've seen the moon look like a fingernail, right? Just a little sliver of the moon. Well, when at least 2 people saw that sliver, they would go and make the announcement, we've seen the new moon, and then the officials would have to verify that the new moon is there, and it would start the celebration period. Now, sometimes the new moon started maybe 1 or 2 days before there was any sight of it, but they didn't start their celebration until they could see it. Well, about halfway through the lunar month is when the moon is full, and at the end of the lunar month, then you have the sliver of the fingernail, but on the other side that you can see, and so that's how their system worked. But at the beginning of the month, they were having this feast. So David says, there's going to be a feast. You go. You feel, my seat's going to be empty. If your father asks, tell him I asked permission to go home and have a sacrifice. If he's not upset about that, then he's not trying to kill me. If he's upset about that, he's trying to kill me. Well, first day, Saul sees David missing. He goes, oh, he must be unclean. And I don't want to, show my cards to Jonathan right now. I'm not going to say anything. Second day comes, and the way the seating arrangement is Saul, Abner, Jonathan, and probably David next to Jonathan. And so Saul looks over at the empty seat again, at the table. This is an important feast. Feast of the New Moon happens every month. Why isn't David here? The second day he asks. And then Jonathan says, he asked permission to go home to make a sacrifice with his family. I gave him permission. And that Saul loses it. He says, you are a son of a rebellious woman, and you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. Don't you understand that as long as that man is alive, you will never sit on the throne? And he takes a spear and he throws it at his own son, planning to pin his son against the wall. Well, he goes out, the arrangement that they had, I'm going to shoot the arrows. If I say they've gone too far, if I send the lad out to get them, they're beyond you. He goes out, gets them, then you'll know that my father has sought harm for you. That's exactly what he does. This young man has no idea he's involved in this. He plays a very important role, but has no clue. After he brings the arrows back, he gives them his bow and arrow and says, you just go ahead and go home, back to town. David comes out, falls on his face, bows to Jonathan 3 times. They get up, they hug, they cry, they weep. And Jonathan says, you really got to leave. My dad's trying to kill you. But remember, you and I have an oath, and we've made it before the Lord. We're on the same side here. And I'm going to protect you as much as I can. You're going to protect me, and our kids are going to protect each other. So that is the story that we're going to talk about. I already have somebody that wants to make a comment.
Well, at the beginning, you asked if we had any questions or comments, but I was a little bit confused. I don't know if this thing's working. About the end of chapter 16, when it talks about that Saul said, let David come and be my servant because I like him. And then when we get to 17, and at the end of the story about David and Goliath, it says, he's kind of like, so who is this kid when he comes out? That confused me. Like, I thought he'd already gone to the palace and was already serving Saul, but then when he comes out to fight David, he's like, who is this kid, and
the best explanation I have for that is that, and I bring it into today's terminology, how many people do you think work 2 tiers away from the president that he knows a little bit about him but doesn't know much personally about him, and somebody else is probably, hey, that guy helps him, and you know, he might have his own auto pin or something, and he sends a letter, hey, we want to keep David here. There's a high likelihood that Saul and David were not intimately connected back then, because it would have been improper for a guy that's a shepherd to be in the king's bedroom, for one, when he's having his episodes. So he's probably playing behind a curtain, and he probably tells his servant maybe, you know what, I like that guy, he helps me, make sure he can stay here. But he's probably not intimately connected with David at that particular point. That's the best solution either that or it's not in chronological order. I think it is in chronological order, and I think we can understand that. Even, you know, in big companies, the president of a company probably doesn't know people that's removed from him a couple levels very well. The president of the United States probably doesn't know everybody that's running around in his orbit, and those who are close to him probably go between. That's what I think happened, but I can't say for sure. But that is a slightly confusing episode as far as how the chronology goes. All right, so let's pick up there and let's answer our questions. First of all, before we answer the questions, what stuck out to you in just the reading of the story, as I was telling the story, that you found interesting? Anything? This is your chance to just say, you know what, I came across something interesting that I want to share with a group. Nothing. I tell you, you guys must be a lot smarter than I am, because I'm always finding something in here that I had not picked up on before, or that's something that stands out. And I've probably read this story. I would assume I read this story as much as most of you, as many times as most of you, and I'm still finding stuff out. All right, Jared had his hand up first.
I've heard it talked about that David was a runt, and he was a little guy, and maybe like an underdog. He was an underdog against Goliath, of course, but he's described by the servant as a mighty man of valor. So I want to kind of point out that the issue with him was that he was too young. It wasn't that he was unusually small. He was a young, handsome guy who was too young to be in the army, but that doesn't mean that he was a weakling.
Yeah, he probably has some strength to him, being out and working outside, working with the sheep. You have to carry those sheep sometimes and do things of that nature. He was smaller than Saul, obviously. Saul was head and shoulders above everybody else. And he was probably smaller than his older brother. His older brother was big enough that when Samuel saw his older brother, he thought, man, this has got to be him. So yeah, he wasn't. One of the main things was he just hadn't been in battle before. He's never been in battle before. Even though he's a brave guy, he's killed a bear and a lion. He's not battle tested, and he's only 15. Now, I was thinking about this and just trying to bring it into our terminology, and neither one of these two guys are in the auditorium right now, so you can tell them if you want, or we can keep this quiet. Could you imagine that the age difference is probably close to Brian and Luke? So let's say Luke just gets up there and just delivers this incredible sermon, and Brian says, here, have my Bible, have my laptop, you're the guy, man. I'm giving you everything. Please make a covenant with me. There's something special about you. So there's that age difference there that makes this even more odd. And what do we learn about Abraham and Melchizedek? And who blesses whom? Who gives to whom? So Jonathan has to be aware that David in some capacity is better than me or chosen by God in some special way that I'm not chosen. Mary?
I was just wondering why Saul... can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering why Saul gives that particular criticism to Jonathan, in verse 30. He says, you're a son of a perverse, rebellious woman, and then he says that about the shame of your mother's nakedness. What's that about?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that. It would be like, to me, it's just like this major insult of what you're doing here is as bad as exposing your mother's nakedness. You're laying, it's clear that you are working against me. And it's for your own shame and the shame of your mother's nakedness. It's just a bad situation. So that'd be a good thing. Maybe you could do a little research on it, report back next time.
Okay.
So be careful what you bring up. I might have you do some more research on that. That is one that I did not make. I did not do more research on. Joe.
Yeah, you sort of mentioned it because you had mentioned in prior classes, look for the minor characters. And when Susan and I were going through the lesson, the servant of Jonathan, so he goes out there and he knows what he's doing. He's going to shoot the arrows this way or that way and all that. And I've got to imagine that the servant's like, Jonathan, why are we out here shooting in the middle? I mean, but there's no, it doesn't record him saying anything. And I think it's amazing that he doesn't say anything, or at least it's not recorded.
Yeah.
That
it says he didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, but he didn't question.
Yeah.
And
he was a lad, young.
Yeah,
he played a major part in the story, even though he didn't know he was.
Exactly.
And how many times do we play small roles in other people's story, and we don't even realize we played that role in their story? We're just totally clueless.
Well, what I thought about is that's us. I mean, we're in the story of God, and we don't know what's going on. And so for us to always question question God, there's sometimes we just need to go do what he says to do.
Yeah, good point.
And maybe it'll be explained later, maybe it won't. But it just came across as he didn't question. Okay, Jonathan, if we're going out here and shooting at some rocks or whatever he chose to do, he didn't question. And I thought that was
okay.
As I read through it, I'd never thought about that.
All right, so he does what he's supposed to do. He doesn't question it. He just does it, and that's what we should do with God. Not question God, not to keep asking God, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And are you sure you want me to go do this? And so that's a very good point. You have something, brother?
Yeah. In this story, I think I've overlooked it a lot of times. But if you go and you pay attention to Jonathan, I really like Jonathan.
He's a pretty good guy.
He is. He's a great guy. He tries to honor his father, but he doesn't allow Saul to push him into sin. He knows David's going to be the next king instead of him. He has enough faith in God to accept that. He doesn't follow Saul into sin against David. He honors his covenant with David. And at the very end, he's with his father in battle and he loses his life.
Yeah.
He just seems like he's all around doing the best that he can do in the situation that he's in. And at the same time, he's got enough faith in God to accept all that's going on around him.
Yeah, so in his personality profile, he's in that S category, the DIS, the steady, peacemaking type category. He's trying to always make peace between David and his father. He's trying not to go against Saul, but then he realizes sometimes he has to when it's God. And I think that's a good point. We'll look at this maybe more when we get to the lessons we learn from the characters. But it's just a very important thing to remember that Jonathan loved David, but Jonathan loved God. And God's will was more important to Jonathan than his own will and his own power. And that takes a pretty big guy. What his father said is true. As long as David's alive, you're not going to be king. And Jonathan accepted that. Because you'll find out later, after this battle that they fight, Jonathan goes and meets David again for the last time. And when he meets him again, he goes, I know God has chosen you to be king. One day you're going to, my father knows that deep down. And when you are king, now this isn't accurate, this is what he thinks at this time, when you are king, I'm going to be right beside you. So in Jonathan's picture, and that brings us back to, I think he knew all this almost immediately when he saw David maybe holding Goliath's head still. He knew that he was someone different. He was going to be the next king. Because it might be something like, we talk about these are real people with real personalities making real decisions in real time, they have real consequences. He might not know it as fully at that moment as he knew it when he meets David later and says, I know you're going to be king. But he knows it. He knows there's something different about this. All right, so let's look at the question number one. What are the key moments of the story? What's the inciting incident that changes everything here for both Jonathan and David? Carrie?
David returns after killing Goliath, and Jonathan sees him. And then
Yeah. And they have this conversation, and I can't help but think, and I know I've emphasized this a lot, it has to do something with him holding Goliath's head. I mean, there's just something in that picture, that image, that brings us out where David, I try to get you to try to be in the story, and you don't have to do this if you don't want, but just imagine the facial expression and the body language of Jonathan as he's looking at David. I mean, what would your face look like if you were looking at someone else in total amazement? I mean, maybe a half smile, eyes big, and just realize I'm seeing someone very special right now. Someone who's done something. And that's the look that I envision Jonathan having. And I also envision David having almost, he's still bold, but almost, a clueless look. I mean, could you imagine David putting on Jonathan's robe? He may not be too big for him, but we don't know, but he's putting on the robe of a prince. And he's sitting there, and this prince, who's going to be the next king, is giving him all this stuff. He's got to be a little surprised by all this as it's taking place. So that's got to be the inciting incident that takes place there. And so from then on out, you have some rising action. And just think about this. The time between the inciting incident and the climax is usually the rising action. And the time from the climax to the resolution is where you're going to have your falling action. And these inciting incidents, sometimes they come in waves. It's not just one thing. It's a couple things that happen, and then you have this rising action. So I think the rising action is Saul becomes jealous, and repeatedly he's trying to seek to kill David. Jonathan defends David, and he intervenes for him at the beginning of chapter 19. And then they work out this secret code here, this secret message to save David's life. Where do you get for the climax? Where does this story, this particular story of this relationship stop and it comes to a climax, you think?
When Saul confronts Jonathan about the plot.
Yeah. When Saul confronts Jonathan, and he says all that terminology that Mary was a little concerned about, and he throws the spear at Jonathan, now that's the climax. Now these two are never going to be the same, and this relationship has stopped. And Jonathan's made his choice, and it's clear to everybody now. And so then you start the falling action. Jonathan sends David away. Using the arrow signal. They meet, weep, they reaffirm their covenant. This is the eternal covenant. And then the resolution isn't, at this point, David becoming king. It's simply, they do have one more visit. And you can read that, and you know what, it's probably worth, let's go ahead and read that. Let's go turn to chapter 23, 14 through 18. Because when I get to this, it's hard for me to spend a lot of time on this. All right, so chapter 23, 1 Samuel 23, 14 through 18, it says, "And David stayed in the strongholds in the wilderness and remained in the mountains of the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought every day to kill him every day, but God did not deliver him to his hand. So David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life, and David went to the wilderness of Ziph to a forest. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, 'Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that.' So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods. Jonathan went to his own house." All right, so what do we learn from the story? Give me a couple things that you learned from the story. Terry's already shared one that we learned from the character. Anything we learned from the story? True friendship isn't just about liking and having an emotional connection with somebody. It's a promise. It's a covenant. It's a relationship. And most of us probably have some friends like that would always have our back, and we will always have their back. We're in a very strong covenant relationship with them. Love that honors God sometimes requires personal sacrifice. Jonathan liked David, but he liked God more. And that was what was important to him. And that was to his own detriment. It cost him everything. Eventually, it's going to cost him his own life. Faithful friends intercede for others. You know, if somebody's talking bad about your friend, even if it's your dad, and even if it's the king, Jonathan says that he wouldn't have anything of it. He had two different occasions said, "Dad, you got this all wrong. You do not know David. You are not treating him properly. And that's treason. That's rebellion against your own father. We talked about a king can't be guilty of insurrection, right? But the son can be, and so can the rest of the family. So you have all that that's in there. And then I really like the fact that God sends Jonathan to David later and encourages him. I think we'll also learn, as far as Jonathan, from the characters in the story, Jonathan was courageous, he was humble, he was spiritually insightful. He discerns what Saul cannot. Saul, you've been told, not just what Saul can't discern. What's Saul been told? God's chosen someone else. You're not going to be king anymore. God's chosen someone better than you. Someone who has a heart like his. And Saul fought against that. Jonathan acquiesced to God's will here and says, I'm willing to do whatever God wants. He lets go of his own future for the sake of God's kingdom. That's huge. David, I think David received the friendship cordially. He was glad. It was a great friendship. He wept more than Jonathan, it says, when they parted. But in David's mind, who was the most important person in this story? God. And that starts to continue. One thing that we should have learned already is one of the things that makes David a man after God's own heart stands in contrast with Saul is David's humility. David never gets big in his own eyes. Doesn't seem to. Although Saul does and makes monuments to himself and all this good stuff, David is not like that. He trusts God's timing. This is amazing. It's years for the time he's anointed, the time he actually becomes king. It's a phenomenal amount of time, and yet he never takes over, never tries to take over. He could have caused trouble for Saul instead of playing the harp for him. He could have started in the castle saying, you know what, I'm really the king. I was appointed. We all know that the evil spirit comes upon him. We know that what God done. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He lets it play out. And then Saul, he clings to power even though God has not chosen him. He's blinded by jealousy and rage. And of course, you have the whole evil spirit thing that comes upon him. What else did we learn about David being a man after God's own heart? Anything?
You alluded to this, but just his patience. I mean, he was in there playing the harp, and he could have gone in there and killed him. But when he finds out from Jonathan for sure, Jonathan really confirms to himself that Saul's after him. David could have said, okay, now I know for a fact I'm going to be in there playing the harp or whatever, and take an occasion to kill him. But he runs from him.
Yeah. You have the
And
first time here.
he's been anointed. So, and he's killed Goliath. So it's not like he's just somebody that showed up. He runs because he knows he shouldn't be killing the king that God chose.
So and that's a theme that keeps going on and on and on in his life, right? This is the first example of this, but this is going to come over and over and over where he doesn't do this. We know that he keeps his covenant with Jonathan and his family. Later, we're going to see that. And here's something I want you to think about one of the similarities between David and God is David loves God's people like God loves God's people. David loves God's people. He never wants one of God's people to get harmed. He over and over and over again. You're going to see this over and over and over again. Now, he doesn't have any qualms about killing God's enemies, but he doesn't want any harm to come upon God's people. And so he loves Saul in all of this. Did you have one more?
Yeah. Along those same lines, I think David must have held out hope that Saul would change. And he wanted to think that Saul could change. I mean, if you look at what happened later in David's life, David needed to repent himself. And I think maybe he was hoping that Saul would repent.
Yeah, very well could have. Very well could have been hoping that. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll pick up. Now we're going to go back and look at how Saul is really going. The evil spirit is having a huge impact on Saul and how he's trying to kill David.